Don't underestimate how hard this is going to be to start something up. And, before you go buy a second business, make sure your first one is humming along, because you could buy a second brand and take two of them down at the same time if you're not careful. So, really working with a coach and having somebody ask you the tough questions, and somebody cares enough about you. I'm not interested in having transactions. I'm interested in having franchisees for life.
Welcome to The Training Effect, the show where we uncover how learning systems and operational training drive real business success. I'm your host, Doug Mark, and today we're diving into the franchising world with someone who's spent nearly 2 decades mastering the art of training franchise owners for success. Jeremy Morgan is the group president at Horsepower Brands, where he leads strategic initiatives for Groovy Hughes Painting, Bumblebee Blinds franchises, and many others. But before that, he spent almost a decade at CertaPro Painters, designing and delivering training programs that turn new franchise owners into successful operators. Today, we're going to explore how to build training systems that actually scale, how to set franchisees up for a long-term success, and what separates mediocre onboarding from transformational development. Jeremy, thanks for joining the show.
Well, I appreciate you having me, and thank you for the kind words.
Talking about operations and training, this is where I spend almost all of my time. I absolutely love this topic. And you've got a lot of expertise in this field, a lot of history working in these. I'm excited to chat today. One of the biggest challenges in franchising is what happens, I feel like, right after someone signs on that dotted line, right? They've bought into the brand, they're excited, they've invested their money, and then the reality hits that they're now business owners, right? They've realized they're not just buying a business, they're learning to run one. And I feel like if the training isn't there, that gap can be brutal. It can be really scary. But you spent years doing this, right? As director of new franchisee training at CertaPro. What were the sort of biggest mistakes you saw new franchise owners make in those early days, the first 90 days?
That's a great question. Yeah, you talk about all this time. I start to think back. I see a lot of faces in my mind. Over the course of my career, I've launched several hundred franchisees into home services, and made a lot of dear friends and people I care about deeply over the years. And doing that, got myself blessed as doing it. But to answer your question specifically, like what do I see as a challenge area for the first 90 days? Typically when it comes to franchising, and home services folks in particular, where most of my experience lies, things I think end up being hindrances or roadblocks or stumbling blocks to folks in the first 90, typically are going to be around a few things. One, lack of sense of urgency around doing the setup. They're coming from a different world. Maybe they're still trying to wind down a previous career, that kind of stuff. And they may not attack the setup or preparatory things with enough urgency. People say, oh, I'll get around to meeting with that, vendor that has something to do with maybe like marketing. And they delay, but then they don't realize how many other dominoes have to fall after that kind of stuff. And it can create a rocky or a bumpy start. I've seen that be an issue. So, if you look at my personality profiles, you'd see my urgency is in the, top 10%. I'm going to run after, go get it done type. And I always encourage people to adopt a little bit of that in the setup. Procrastination typically kills. And I oftentimes will tell franchisees, okay, it's never going to be easier than it is today, because it only gets busier later on. So attack things right away today. Other things I've seen will be just a lack of capitalization to getting things set up. Could be a bit of a stumbling block, roadblock. And then making sure that they are earmarking the time to learn something new. A lot of times I've seen folks underestimate what it's like to be new and not good at something. They come from a world where, hey, I've been the expert. I've been, high level operating, very well. And now I got to come back to something where I'm the rookie, I'm the freshman, I'm the plebe. And maybe I got to factor in a little bit more one way for myself to acquire or learn new things, or, give myself time to even struggle a little bit. And planning time to struggle, I think is something important to do. And I mean, at the worst case scenario, you don't, and you have extra time on your hands and give yourself more opportunity later on.
When we talk about urgency, right? Like that sort of sense of urgency and just sort of really pushing through early on. I think that's actually true in a lot of our different businesses, right? At least me on the supplier side. when somebody's new to a training program or a learning management system, if they're not facing that urgency head on and really starting to use it right away, we're going to see a steep drop off with the engagement. So I think it's interesting. It really aligns.
Well, yeah, you bring up a good point. I mean, when it comes to learning, there is an algorithm in everybody's head that says use it or you lose it. And when you do learn new things, it's important to put them into practice and into play right away. And that just tags them in the computer in your head that, okay, this information is important. Don't purge it, later on and forget it.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. And I think that urgency is a critical component. It's funny, we didn't always have that realization, and I think sometimes that looking at the data over the years, right, has taught us that, look, the guys who come in here and they're ready to roll, they want to get going and they want to start building. Those are the high success factors that we see. And I'm sure it's got some similarity to what you see too.
It's funny that you bring that up. It just works a thought in my head. It is even from on the franchisor side or the facilitator, the teacher side, if you will, having strategies for the different way people take in information and what's going to be most sticky for one person may not be the stickiest for the other. And so having different ways to deliver that information, and there's something very valuable, same tune, different horn, works. I mean, some people will pick up the process and procedure by just reading the click path of the manual. Other people learn by doing, and what's sticky for one isn't for the other. And so having different modalities of way to deliver that to a wide variety of audience in order to help them achieve the ultimate outcome that you're seeking.
Yeah, I think, oftentimes when people are new into franchising and maybe they're just deciding to franchise their brand, they might come in with hopes that they could just do an in-person training, right? And that could be enough. When you're early on, when you've got a small amount of resources, you don't have the support structure, right? You haven't built out this true onboarding program where we're going to do things in person, we're going to do things online. We've got a coaching team that's going to come out and visit you. We've got, resource bots that you can reach out to. Yeah, all those different modalities, I think, make it a lot easier knowing that you're absolutely right, man. We don't all learn the same ways. Hey, how do you balance teaching someone the sort of what of running a franchise versus the how and the why?
I think that when you're trying to teach somebody how to do something or what they need to be doing, if they don't understand the why or how that affects outcomes or how it can lead to something else or how it can make things either easier or more difficult or more or less profitable, it's just tasks. And nobody wants to do tasks. There needs to be purpose behind something. Oftentimes I've even said that even goes through for the teaching or the training. I mean, there's a sales component into teaching and training. And sometimes I think we can do training to somebody versus doing training for somebody. And the difference in that, nobody wants anything done to them. I mean, we've all been in meetings or classes or something like that where you're just like, oh my gosh, when this person to shut up or how much longer is this going to take? And everything's whizzing by you. It may be really important, valuable stuff, but it's not landing. And the difference between having somebody perceive it as you're doing it to them versus for them is their understanding of the why. That is the switch that flips. That takes a person who's sitting in the room kind of pissed off that you're wasting their time versus somebody who's sitting in the room being grateful or appreciative of, okay, give me more. Thank you for this. Once they get the why and how it benefits them, not necessarily the organization necessarily. There may be some alignment thing, but people care most about themselves. Once they see how it benefits them, they get the why. That's when people lean in and engage at a higher level.
Yeah, that's really well said. And the why component, it's just as important for, franchise owners to understand the why as it is for their staff. And I always go back to the staff that they're working with too. And I know that's not, your job at the franchisor side, but the franchisee is going to be training the staff a lot of the time and explaining that, even it's something simple, right? I always think about if you were to tell somebody who's never mopped a floor, right? A lot of times we deal with people who are hourly staff. This might be their first job. And if we don't explain to them, how to mop the floor, then there's a lot of failure points in something that seems relatively simple to maybe you and I. man, you've got to fill up the mop bucket and you've got to put in a certain percentage of the cleaning fluid. You need to rinse, drain that mop before you drop it. And then the whole reason, why do we do this? Well, we're doing it in the restaurant world so that we don't have bugs and we don't have rodents and the place is clean for customers. And the more we can tell them about the why, they kind of buy into the culture, it feels like, too.
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately, in my experience, most people want to feel of service towards somebody or something. And helping them tap into that, I think, provides more meaning to even something as simple as mopping the floor. Now, you mentioned something about, say, it may not necessarily be my job as a franchisor to train the staff, but it may or may not be on the franchise system, but most importantly, it is my role and my responsibility to serve that franchisee by role modeling how they should do it with their staff. And even bringing that up and say, okay, Mr. and Miss Franchisee, I'm going to be, training or teaching you or showing you this procedure or process or thing of that nature. And the reason why I'm going to do it this way is because I hope that you take these things I'm doing and you steal them, make them your own, and you can leverage that with your staff. And here's why I'm teaching you in this manner, in this way. So they can not just take in the what we're doing, but the how we're doing it with them. And then again, it's now teaching them on two things as opposed to just one. I mean, and adults, we talk about the andragogy versus pedagogy. Kids sit in school, they can learn with their ears. We've kind of trained them to do that way. Adults do not. They learn with their eyes and their hands. They learn by seeing and doing. And so the more you can get them involved in that type of thing, so they're not just, they're watching how you do things so they can then replicate.
When you're out, let's say you're at a location or somebody on your team is at a location, are they teaching the franchisees the exact same way each time, or are they teaching to that franchisee's strength? Or, does it evolve? Does it change depending on what the owner's why is?
That's a good question. I mean, we're kind of starting to skirt between the teaching versus coaching. When somebody's out in the field, typically it's going to be more of a coaching event. Working with staff, and we're talking about, okay, how do we best, affect somebody? I think it's not about a blanket statement. It's about, you have to coach an individual in the task or the process that you're working on with them to their development and understanding level within that task. I'm a big believer in the Ken Blanchard's situational leadership model. Oftentimes I'll be talking to people and say, hey, what's your leadership style? And, what's your provider? I was like, well, I know what my kind of factory defaults I tend to, but I really always effort towards being situational on my leadership styles, because it's not about what makes me comfortable. It's about what is most impactful for that person that I'm serving as their leader.
Yeah, because they're not all the same at the end of the day.
No.
So, yeah. Jeremy, what does an effective onboarding program actually look like? Like, what happens week 1 versus month 3 or 90 days out and that kind of thing?
Well, I'll talk about the way that we set things up. We have it broken into different phases, if you will. So when somebody would, enter into one of our systems, we have our phase 1, and that is focused on setup, if you will. It's entity setup, securing funding, doing that kind of stuff, and just getting all of the base blocks and stuff out of the way. And once they've hit a certain threshold of hitting enough of those tasks where all of the setup is done out of the way, and we know that's done, then we can now shift into the learning component where we're going to phase 2. And we do that via a combination of both asynchronous training through things like learning management systems. We use virtual classrooms quite a bit, as well as in-person classrooms. I like to, then that happens during our phase 2. After that, they graduate out into operations, and then training still continues. We have ongoing continuous learning training, reinforcement, and then personalized individual coaching. So that kind of that 3 phases, if you will. Now, when you get into the phase 2, which is where most people kind of perceive a lot of the training taking place, but most people would kind of conceptualize as training, whether we use things like LMS modules and things like that. We have our virtual classrooms, and then the in-person piece. I'm a big believer in the idea of the flipped classroom. This concept where you use prep to teach concepts, and time together is spent to practice and almost quasi coach. And again, especially for adults, that doing piece of learning, they can watch an LMS to get concepts and tasks and procedure steps and stuff like that and get the concept down. But when we're together, we got to do. And wherever possible, we try to, incorporate those kind of things. And the idea is that it's going to make it more sticky. But I like using LMSs for like either a prep or a follow-up to tie down training that we do. But it's never, an LMS by itself it's a piece that is not a thing unto itself. It needs to be in service of the greater whole. But then, also just being mindful of as you design your different programs, whether it's, the training phase and the coaching phase, understanding people's learning styles and, what is your majority audience learning style? So whether it's active or passive, theoretical or more action oriented or, practical, the things of that nature. I think that kind of stuff is important. Some people are just concrete experiential learners. They have to learn by doing it with real world consequences versus, the people who just read the book and then they got it. So then the active experimentation piece, work on my case, then I put it into practice. That's my preferred kind of combination learning style. I find a lot of folks who are turning into the entrepreneurship tend to be a little bit more towards I got to learn by doing it with my hands and practice it types. They tend to be a little bit just more kinetic type of folks.
That's interesting. You also, something that you mentioned really struck a note with me, which was you talking about kind of ongoing training and not so like a question that I prepped or anything, but just as we're kind of talking about ongoing training, when I'm talking to an emerging brand and in the early stages, there's all their focus is on like getting people onboarded and trained and on the road. And they don't really have this sort of understanding that there's going to be a need for ongoing training. Would you mind just kind of expanding upon, why it's important to have ongoing training and realizing that businesses are also changing and evolving?
Sure, you bet. In fact, with two brands I work with, our teams have put into play. They just have it every Friday for a Ruby Hughes thing. Every Friday, it's a 45-minute meeting. They have about 35 minutes of content that they put together every Friday. They call it Groove and Improve. My Bumblebee group, they call it same type of concept. They call it, Hive and Thrive. But and then they are, part of their strategic planning is, okay, what are the different themes that we see in the business during kind of different cycles of the year? What are different needs that are arising? How do we create content to that? And then they're mapping it out months in advance, preparing that stuff. Delivering that kind of content via a virtual classroom discussion type of format. And then they're recording all of these things and then putting it into our library. And again, I think there's sometimes they will recycle content on an annual basis just because, hey, it's that time of year. We all need a refresher on that stuff. Sometimes it's a new issue popping up that, hey, we're running into something. How can we help people overcome a common challenge and things of that nature? But just putting those type of things into place, I think, is important. And then as, businesses evolve and grow, and, you're going to have these different striations in your population of, the grizzled veterans and then the brand new green folks. And so while that thing, maybe that ongoing training can kind of be kind of the middle band, if you will, you also need to be thinking about your grizzled veterans. How do you still continue to bring value to them? And so that's where you can look to put into place things like mastermind groups, which I believe are a training and development tool, things of that nature, getting different modalities to meet people where they're at.
That's awesome. I think it's a really important thing. And we speak to it often, but not everybody has that mindset initially, right? Because they're thinking along the lines, well, what's this going to cost me? And, I'm not going to need it for, 2 years from now. I'm going to have all my people onboarded. And it's like, no, there's a lot of things that are going to change between now and then.
I'm not going to need it till then, or famous last words, because if you're not thinking about, again, I think sometimes a lot of folks will treat this idea of development and training. I don't even refer to that as like, it's a value creation. Like your job is not to teach people, it's to deliver value to them. And if you're doing that reactively, you're not delivering value. So I think you have to be thinking about this kind of stuff strategically. In my role now, I'm spending a lot of time thinking about, 12 to 24 months out. And I'm thinking through, okay, what is going to be needs that, this population is going to have? What's the makeup of our franchise base going to be? And what are what are going to be the different levels of different needs? How can we marshal resources and be proactive and get stuff done in advance? And I mean, and when you play your cards right, and I don't always get it right, but when you're able to do it, it feels pretty good because you're able to start to deliver on people's needs before they quite really recognize that they've had them.
Yeah.
And you start to hit that flywheel organizationally. That feels good. And you're able to do that for folks.
Yeah, right. Nothing makes them feel better than that. That's awesome. Hey,
I didn't even realize I had this problem, but now I got the solution for it. This is awesome.
yeah, right. That sort of moment of not realizing it's a problem, I think, is that sort of light bulb moment. Like, oh my gosh, yeah. You basically have helped me before I even needed it, type of thing. Like you've set me up for success in the future.
That's what we're always striving to do.
When I think about new owners, this is an interesting group, right? Because yesterday I was a gym teacher and today I own a roofing franchise. And as a gym teacher, what do I know about business? So when we think about these things, like how do you build confidence in somebody who's never run a business before, especially when they're, investing their life savings in a franchise brand?
That's a funny question because it seems like there's never somebody who's kind of in the middle road. Either people are maybe overconfident or way underconfident. Just funny the way things work. But yeah, I mean, I often joke and say I've spent the lion's share of my adult life, taking folks like gym teachers and bankers and turning them into home services contractors and stuff like that. And most have no background in it. That maybe in a Home Depot weekend warrior themselves. So, how do you get them confident? I think it's about this. It's prepping them that, hey, you're not going to be confident. We're going to put you through our entire training program and things of that nature. And I'm going to be evaluating, testing, make sure that, are you ready? And I've oftentimes told folks, despite my best efforts, you will not be confident. Nor really should you be, because you haven't earned confidence. Confidence is earned. It's not bequeathed to somebody. But what I tend to do is I said, but I'm not going to set you up to go out there and drown. I'm not going to put you in the pool unless I know you know how to swim. So if nothing else, let my confidence in you be enough while you go on your own. And then making sure that after the training is in play, who'd been delivered, you have an ongoing coaching to reinforce it, fine tune it, correct it, build upon it with that individual ongoing. And the idea is training by itself is not very successful. Training requires ongoing coaching, and you have to strategically think how those things mesh together. And Malcolm Gladwell talks about it takes 10,000 hours to achieve mastery at something, right? Well, I've done the math on that. And for a typical new franchise owner in the home services world, it's about 27 to 29 months. And so what starts to happen is if, their confidence and competent, is here, gotta get here 10,000 hours. Well, I need to gird them up while they are earning their experiential tags till they get to that mastery section. That is where that coaching comes in. Training will teach you how to do something. The coaching is how to execute it at a high level, and it helps people how to avoid pitfalls and things of that nature. So good coaching and a good coaching structure or process in place is as if not more important than the training component.
In some ways, it's kind of nice hearing that because we've, sometimes people will talk to us who don't know anything about franchising and just thinking about getting into it. And I always kind of ask them their why, right? Like, why is it you want to get into franchising? And there's always this expectation that, franchising means that I can buy a business and someone else will do all the work and I'll get rich. That's what most people think it is. Or at least most of the conversations I have early on with people, and I'm like, you don't know, like you're going to work your tail off for the first 2 years. It's after those first 2 years when things start to click and you're following the everything from the training to the marketing and all of the outreach. that it's all going to start to get a little bit easier. And that's when that's when you'll start to see the rewards a little bit. But man, like, you're going to work hard for the first 2 years, right? Like it's a whole new career. Jeremy, at Horsepower Brands, you're not just kind of managing one franchise system. Obviously, you're overseeing Groovy Hughes and Bumblebee. And I know that there's a lot of other brands there. Each has its own sort of operational nuances. But they all need to be, have consistent training. That's where things kind of get complicated pretty quickly. How do you create a training system that works across multiple brands without sort of losing the nuances and specificity to each brand?
Yeah, it's a great question. In fact, we're in the midst of doing that right now. We're preparing a new business planning program for all of our brands, and we'll be leading all of our brands through annual business planning and following a very similar model for all of them. I was actually just in the meeting where, how do we teach 9 different groups of folks use the tool? In the tool we created, we got it down to 2 versions of the thing. It will work across 9 different brands, but we still build that flexibility in there for some of the idiosyncratic nuances of an HVAC versus a lawn care. You think they're not that similar? Well, they are pretty similar. They both have, a kind of an install component and a subscription service component. A lot of people think, blinds, and window fashions and painting, they're basically the same business model. But it's so trying to create systems that allow for these similar businesses to function in different ways, and where you get into the delivery and maybe some of the sales component is where the nuance piece comes in. And so being able to have kind of the bigger framework that allows in certain areas for flexibility. But I mean, all these businesses still need to generate a lead. All these businesses still need to be able to schedule a quote, service, do a sales call and understand the customer's need and provide options for solution and all that. All that stuff is the same. What is the widget you're using might be a little bit different. So, thinking that through, and that's where you get into the strategy of it. So we're always kind of in that tension of, okay, how do we make these things as similar as possible from a system between the different brands, while still allowing for creating the space for these brands to function within their industries with that nuance.
Because you've built this robust program and I feel like you've kind of systematized your training so that you could roll it out to multiple brands. Does this make it easier for your owners to be multi-concept? Do you have a bunch of owners who are buying into more than one of your brands now because of that?
A brand stacking? Yeah, I mean, we're still a young enough company where we have only a few owners that have done that. And the idea, I always tend to be a little cautious with those type of things. I see the opportunity, and we certainly would like to encourage it in the right situation and instant. But one of the things I always try to tell folks is, don't underestimate how hard this is going to be to start something up. And before you go buy a second business, make sure your first one is humming along, that you've stress tested it, that you've got the right people on the bus, because you could buy a second brand and take 2 of them down at the same time if you're not careful. So, really working with a coach and having somebody ask you the tough questions, and somebody cares enough about you to be like, not just there to sell you another business and take another franchise fee. We don't want to do that. I'm not interested in having transactions. I'm interested in having franchisees for life. We care about these folks. We want them to succeed. We want them to do well. I understand what it means for their families and the folks that work for them and their families. So how do we set people up so they can serve those folks and serve their own families for the long run?
We don't want to forget, first of all, how hard those first 2 years were, right? Like, don't forget about that. And then the other thing too is that, as you've spent the time, working with these owners, something that you said really resonated with me, which is you care about them. Like, and Jeremy, I don't want to overspeak here, but that doesn't come up in a lot of my interviews. And I think it's one of the most important things you've said today is how much Horsepower and you care about these owners, because at the end of the day, your job is to make them successful, right? Because if they're running successfully, then things are going great for you guys at home, I feel like. And so I love that that's where your mindset is.
Yeah, I hope for anybody entering franchising, and I hope for anybody who's working in on the franchisor side, they get to experience that camaraderie, kind of like your brothers in the foxhole type of situation that you do when you work with a good coach. When I was a franchisee, I had tremendous coaches and mentors who really gave a damn about Jeremy. I've tried to, as best as I'm able, role model that for, those who I work with in the industry and things of that nature. But there is a lot of deep meaning that comes from being able to take that gym teacher and help them enjoy that entrepreneurial dream.
That's
what that means for their family and stuff like that.
Yeah.
One of the things I'm most proud about in my career is like, especially with our team here at Horsepower, the teams that I work with, they live that out, and they are true servant leaders who deeply care about their franchisees. That kind of stuff is what brings the meaning to all the stuff that we do.
Yeah, that it means so much to me, and I think that is way more impactful than whatever P&L statement you can show me. So yeah, that's awesome, man. Congrats and kudos to you and the team at Horsepower. That's really cool. Love hearing that. Jimmy, how do you measure when training's actually working? Do you have some KPIs that you like to track or that kind of matter most to kind of tell you the story about how someone's performing?
I mean, that's the thing, like, moving from like the person who's running training to the person who is now leading the trainers, have to like look at the business and the case and all that kind of stuff. You're like, man, is this just a sunk cost, or can we do this cheaper and all that kind of stuff? But it's also measuring what is the impact of it. And it is admittedly at times hard to measure. You plant seeds and you don't necessarily see the sprouts come up for some time. No. And so having that long view of it, you can look at some kind of metrics on, okay, what is their, ramp up, certain metrics within the first 6 or 12 weeks, that kind of thing. And so there's the numerical measures. I will also look at it as a cultural aspect of it. How bought into the culture are our folks? How willing are people to go through the tough ramp up period and have their eyes on the prize and maintain that bigger picture and things of that nature? So there's a lot of intangible measurements of it as well. I think if you want to have a strong franchisee, quite frankly, overall business culture, I think it starts in that training world. I've been around franchise systems where it's very cold or transactional, if you will, and oftentimes it's franchisees and franchisors kind of sniping at one another. What have you done for me lately, and all of that kind of stuff. And I've been around ones that are like a big family and are very open. And where I see the difference in those things occur, the linchpin there, is it starts at the beginning. It starts at the onboarding and the training. And do the franchisees feel the care that you have for them? And when they feel it, they tend to reciprocate. And then they tend to buy in. They tend to be a little bit more forgiving when I make mistakes. I make them from time to time, but if people understand the character behind something, they tend to give you a little bit more grace, and they tend to lean in and want to participate in building something together, as opposed to, okay, you're the franchisor, what are you going to do for me?
I've seen obviously that in my career as well. We work with hundreds of brands, and there's plenty of brands out there where there's a really natural sort of animosity between franchisees and franchisors, and Thankfully, I think, I just remember going to conferences. I'm actually thinking of like a speaker that I saw at Springboard once. And, he kind of talked, and it might have even been a guest that as somebody was in the crowd, but he's just like, what do you do when like your franchisees think they're not being supported by the home office, and then the franchisor thinks the franchisee's lazy, and I'm like, well, wow, that's a breakdown, right? Like a big breakdown that you've got to work through, or it seems like the whole system is going to, fall apart at that point. If that's the sort of, if it's that much, friction is okay, but that kind of sort of animosity is just unhealthy, I feel like. So.
And it's tough to recover from. I mean, there is such a thing as you can ruin a relationship beyond repair. I think it comes back to about being really, strategic and well thought out, thinking ahead, but being highly intentional with franchisees. You don't want to spend a bunch of time, talent, and treasure trying to recover from that kind of relationship breakdown. Focus on the beginning of the relationships. How do you pour into that and get it established on firm ground?
Yeah. Well said. That's awesome. Hey, what's the most common operational breakdown that you see? Like, how do you help a franchise owner course correct when there's an operational breakdown out there in the field?
Well, I think it's about expectations early and then letting them understand the why early. And I think a lot of that helps be preventative. But I mean, sometimes you're just going to have the maverick and who doesn't want to conform or doesn't care about the why. And I think, in those types of situations, it can be, maybe they need to understand it's greater than, just them. It's not just them they're affecting, but it might be their neighboring franchises that could be having a negative effect on things of that nature. And I mean, there's the idea of, from a leadership standpoint, we try to lead through influence and influence around doing the right things, and the why behind it. And for the vast majority of folks, that will solve problems. And then if it's not happening, you have to diagnose, is this a can't do? Either they don't get it, or we need to focus on the training and helping the understanding the why better, or is it a won't do? They don't care to do it. Well, that's when franchise agreements and expectations and, consequence for behaviors and stuff like that can come into play. 90% of people are good intention, fairly reasonable. You just need to work with them.
And it's also where, I feel like the sort of early stages, right, when we're reviewing candidates, like if we can see signs of those kinds of people, those are the ones you're going to kind of rule out for one reason or another. And I think that's the difference between a mature franchise and immature franchise is immature franchises, they need to sell to make money, right? And immature franchises realize that, hey, sometimes having a maverick like this is actually going to set us back further. Let's pass on this candidate.
Yeah, sometimes the juice isn't worth the squeeze. A good tool that I've come across that I'm a big believer in is a test called the caliber profile. And, and you can use that in either evaluating staff that you're considering bringing on board. You have also used it to evaluate potential franchisees. And it's not just an evaluation tool, but it's also a tool that can be used to, better understand somebody. And so I've often used it with people I've worked with and say, okay, here's my caliber profile. Here's your caliber profile. Where are we going to grade on each other? Where are we going to make beautiful music together? How do we be aware of that? Because sometimes differences have this misattribution bias where you're like, oh, we're different. And a profile like a caliper helps you kind of peek behind the curtain and get a sense of what's somebody's factory default. I think a great example would be, even like we all individuals we develop different compensatory skills, make up for, things of deficiency. So if you were to look at my personality profile, my caliper, you would see that my thoroughness is in the bottom third of the population. But what I've developed over the years is this compensatory skill of overcoming my natural preference to being less thorough because life punishes you otherwise. But in times of transition or stress, tend to go back to the factory default. And so, and that's certainly been the case, at different times of like high pressure or stress or, big transitions of life, stuff like that. That shadow side of those things can manifest themselves. And just even having that type of understanding about even a potential franchisee coming on board is helpful. It puts you as a leader and somebody cares about this person, this franchisor, to have a better understanding and be able to better be situational in how you teach, how you coach, how you serve that franchisee, understanding these factory defaults and talking about it ahead of time and just working with folks and getting into that why you're doing what you're doing with them. But when you spend that kind of time investing in somebody from that perspective, you typically engender a lot of loyalty because they're like, this person actually cares enough to have the difficult conversation with me, but in a proactive manner, not in a reactive, I'm going to spank you manner. It's a great tool. It's served me well over many years.
Sounds like it. That's awesome. Hey, One last big question. Can you share a quick story about a franchisee that is maybe struggling where training or coaching helped them kind of turn things around?
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to say several years back, worked with a franchisee who was out of New Jersey, and he was not a natural salesperson. No, he was more of an introvert, kind of a engineering accountant type of personality type. You know what I'm saying? More oriented towards things as opposed to people. They just wonderful guy, super nice guy, but just didn't come off as highly as engaging as others did. And so, but he had to do sales, and he was starting to struggle a little bit with connecting with folks. You know, he would go through the process of a quote, but he wouldn't understand, connect with people's needs and help them find solutions, if you will. And so, you know, we started putting together some collateral and sales, you know, tools and, you know, things of that nature, sales trainings and stuff like that. And being as process oriented as it was, he's like, I want to memorize the scripts. If I can memorize different scripts, then I will actually make them my own and have conversations. So it was funny. He was like, what I started to do was I just took all the sales trainings and the different, you know, role plays that I would hear, and I would record them, and you get them on, this is the time when you had CD players in cars, put them in a CD in his car. And he would just listen to them over and over and over and over again. And I was like, why are you doing that? It's certainly paying dividends, but like, what's your rationale behind it? He's like, well, when I came to the US, I didn't speak English. So how did I learn to speak English? I listened to the radio and I mimicked what I heard. And then I adopted the language and I made it my own. And it's like, he goes, I learned to speak English that way. And I wanted to so I just decided I was going to use the same process to learn to speak sales. Anyway. And he taught me something that day. And I was like, well, good for you, man. And so, you know, we've now started to adopt and use some of those different things. We actually use some AI technology for our franchisees now, where people will go in and do a sales call. But now we have all these, you know, note takers on our phones and all this stuff. So they asked if they can use a note taker with their homeowner, and so they don't miss anything in the conversation. And they use that in doing their quote, but it's also recording the interaction and all that. And then the AI can give them feedback on their process and on their sales, and they can provide instruction. They can listen to themselves back in the third person and get that suggestions. And then, you know, we as coaches can listen into it and provide additional feedback to support coaching, you know, and be able to do the ride along virtually, if you will. So, I mean, you know, we took what somebody used to do with themselves to teach themselves English by recording things on the CDs, and now have morphed it into the, you know, this 21st century AI tool. But I think that same continuum, when a franchisee can take a step out of themselves and then observe themselves in the third person objectively, rapid improvement can occur. And it's so seeking out those types of opportunities, I think, are big in helping people overcome, you know, different internal stumbling blocks that they may have.
All right. Okay. Last question is, look, you're traveling all the time, right? You just came home off the plane today. We who are on the road often stop at many different franchise brands along the way because we need fast food or something quick that we can go to. When you're on the road, no matter where you are in the world, is there a brand that when you see it, you're like, oh, that feels like home?
Well, I just, I live in just outside of Philly. I grew up in the Midwest. I went to school at the University of Nebraska. I have to work for a company now that is based in Omaha, Nebraska. And every time I go back, there is a Nebraska sandwich called a Runza. And when I go back to Nebraska, I will make it a point to grab myself a Runza. But that feels like Midwest home to me.
So, hey, thank you so much for coming on the show. For listeners who are either, you know, running franchise systems or they're thinking about buying into one, what's the best place, or where is the best place to connect with you and learn more about horsepower brands?
You bet. Best place to reach me directly. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm sure you can probably bring in my LinkedIn profile. My handle is the linkedin.com/n/Jeremy N, like Nebraska, Morgan. You can find me directly there. And then I would encourage you to, if you're interested in learning more about our franchise portfolio brands, horsepower.com and horsepower brands, or horsepowerbrands.com rather. And checking out Horsepower. And then the brands that I directly work with right now are both Groovy Hughes Painting and Bumblebee Blinds.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeremy. This has been an incredible conversation with our guest, Jeremy Morgan, about building training systems that set franchise owners up for real, sustainable success along the way. If you want to learn more about Horsepower Brands, visit their website or connect with Jeremy on LinkedIn. If this episode resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe to The Training Effect, leave us a review, share it with someone in the franchise world. We really appreciate you. See you next time. Thanks so much.